I was lying in the hospital bed when the machines stopped beeping. Not slowing down, not fading. Stopped. I am Father Ezekias Vorn, and I am 102 years old. I have buried 5 popes, outlived 3 wars, and watched empires dissolve like salt in warm water. I have sat beside the dying for longer than most people have been alive. I know what the end looks like. I have held its hand more times than I can count. And on the 14th of January, in the year 2026, I became the end myself. At least, that is what the doctors wrote in their report. Clinical cessation. No pulse, no breath, no measurable brain activity for 11 minutes and 43 seconds. The young nurse named Petra Soland was the one who covered my face with the sheet. I know this because she told me afterward, weeping in a way that embarrassed her, pressing her hands together as if she were the one who needed absolution. But I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in those 11 minutes and 43 seconds. I need you to understand who I was before that moment, because the man who came back is not entirely the same man who left. I was born in a village so small it no longer exists on any map. Dorvel, it was called. A cluster of stone houses pressed against a hillside in a country that has since changed its name twice. My mother baked bread every morning before sunrise. My father repaired clocks. I grew up surrounded by the smell of yeast and the sound of ticking, and perhaps that is why I have always understood time differently than other people. Time, to me, was never a river flowing in one direction. It was always more like the inside of one of my father's clocks. Gears turning inside gears. Every movement connected to every other movement. Nothing wasted. Nothing truly lost. I entered the seminary at 17. I was ordained at 23. I served in places that would make your throat tighten if I named them. Places where faith was not a comfort but a survival tool. As necessary as clean water, and warmer than any coat. I have seen things that would rearrange the furniture of your mind permanently. I have also seen things so beautiful that I still cannot speak of them without my voice changing. By the time I was 80, I had stopped expecting surprises. I had made my peace with the shape of my life. I prayed, I counseled, I waited. I was not afraid of death. I was, if I am honest, mildly curious about it, the way you might be curious about a country you have always heard described but never visited. And then January 14th arrived, and I visited. The first thing I want to tell you, because it matters more than anything else I am about to say, is that there was no darkness. Everyone assumes there is darkness. There is not. What there is, and I am going to struggle with language here because human language was not built to carry this particular weight. What there is a quality of light that makes every light you have ever seen feel like a rough draft. Like someone had been practicing light your entire life, and you had only ever seen the practice versions. This was the finished thing. I was standing, though I had no body. I was seeing, though I had no eyes. These are not metaphors. I am telling you what occurred as accurately as I am able. There was a presence. I will not tell you what it was or what it called itself because the name it gave cannot be transliterated into any alphabet I know. And because the moment I heard it, I understood that naming it would be like trying to pour an ocean into a thimble. The ocean does not fit. The thimble was not designed for this. But the presence was not frightening. It was the opposite of frightening. It was the thing that frightening has always been a shadow of, the way cold is a shadow of warmth, the way silence is a shadow of music. It spoke to me, or rather, it placed understanding inside me the way my father once placed gears inside a clock, carefully, intentionally, each piece in its exact right position. And what it placed inside me was this: The year 2026 is not an ordinary year. I know how that sounds. I know that every generation believes itself to be living at the hinge point of history, the moment when everything pivots. I have heard that claim so many times that I had become skeptical of it. I had watched predicted catastrophes fail to arrive and predicted golden ages dissolve into ordinary Tuesday mornings. I had grown old being carefully unimpressed by prophecy. But this was not prophecy in the way you are imagining it. This was not a list of disasters handed to me by a nervous angel with a clipboard. What I was shown was more like being handed a key and then being taken to a door and watching the door open. What lay behind it was not a single event. It was a convergence, a moment when several long, separate rivers finally reached the same sea at the same time. Let me tell you what I was shown. The first thing I saw was a map of human connection, not a political map, not the borders we draw and redraw with such exhausting regularity, but a map of how human beings actually relate to one another. Trust, dependency, shared belief, the invisible threads that hold communities together the way mycelium holds a forest floor together underground. Invisible until you dig, essential to everything living above it. Those threads were changing, not breaking. I want to be precise about this because the difference matters enormously. They were not breaking. They were rerouting. The old pathways, the ones that had organized human society for the better part of 3 centuries, the pathways that ran through particular institutions, particular geographies, particular inherited loyalties. Those pathways were thinning, and new ones were forming in patterns that did not yet have names. I watched this happening and I felt something I did not expect to feel. I felt recognition. Because I had watched something similar happen before, twice in my long life, and both times the people living through it had not understood what was occurring until it was already finished. They were too close. They could see individual threads, but not the pattern. They could feel the pulling, but not understand the weaving. The second thing I was shown was harder to look at. There is a category of suffering, and I say this as a man who has witnessed suffering in forms that would hollow you out. There is a category of suffering that is not caused by cruelty or indifference, but by delay. By the gap between what humanity already knows how to do and what humanity has actually gotten around to doing. Children who die of diseases we have known how to prevent for decades. Loneliness that persists in a world drowning in communication tools. Hunger that exists alongside abundance. This gap, this terrible gap, was shown to me as a physical thing, a visible distance. And what I was told, what was placed inside me with that quiet, gear-setting precision, was that 2026 was the year this gap began to close. Not finish closing. Begin. I want to be careful here because I have spent a century watching people confuse the beginning of a good thing with the completion of it, and then become bitter when completion takes longer than they hoped. The beginning of a good thing is not a small thing. The first crack in ice is not ice melting, but it is the beginning of ice melting. And if you have been cold long enough, the first crack deserves to be witnessed with appropriate reverence. The third thing I was shown, and this one I have turned over in my mind every day since I returned, was a face. Not a specific face that I recognized, more like a composite, a kind of representative image. Young, uncertain, standing at a crossing point between 2 very different versions of the future, not knowing which direction to step, not knowing that the step was happening whether a choice was made or not. And the understanding that accompanied this image was simple and devastating in equal measure. The people who would shape what came next were not the people anyone was currently watching. They were not in the places anyone was currently looking. They were in ordinary rooms, in ordinary circumstances, carrying questions they had not yet learned to trust. And the difference between the better future and the worse one was almost entirely a question of whether those people, those quiet, uncertain, ordinary people, received the right information at the right moment, or whether they did not. That was it. That was the hinge. Not a great man, not a singular event. The distribution of understanding at a moment when understanding could still change the direction of the gears. I want to tell you about coming back now, because that part is also important, and I think it is often left out of accounts like this one. People focus on the destination and forget the return journey. Coming back hurt. I do not mean physically, though the body was not pleased to be reoccupied after nearly 12 minutes of vacancy. I mean it hurt the way it hurts to walk back into a dim room after standing in bright sunlight. The contrast is disorienting. The colors look wrong. Things that were familiar feel suddenly strange, not because they have changed, but because you have. And the adjustment is not instantaneous. I lay in that hospital bed for 3 days before I spoke to anyone about what I had experienced. I needed those 3 days. I needed to press the experience down into language, the way you press a large garment into a small bag, knowing that some of the shape will be lost, but that the essential fabric will survive. On the 3rd day, a young doctor named Callum Dresch came to check on me. He was tired. He had the eyes of someone who had been carrying too much for too long without adequate rest. He sat beside my bed and asked how I was feeling, and I looked at him and said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully because I have something to tell you that will sound impossible and is entirely true." He listened. To his considerable credit, he listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he sat quietly for a long time. Then he said, "I don't know what to do with that." And I said, "I know. Neither do I entirely. But I was sent back to say it, and so I am saying it." That exchange has become the pattern of my days since January. I say what I was given to say. People sit with the discomfort of not knowing what to do with it. And then, slowly, something shifts. Not in dramatic and visible ways, in the small, quiet ways that are actually how everything important changes. A question someone had been afraid to ask gets asked. A conversation that had been postponed gets started. A direction someone had been uncertain about becomes slightly clearer. I am not a prophet in the theatrical sense. I want to be very clear about that. I do not have a scroll. I have not been given a timeline of disasters to announce in a tone of satisfied urgency. What I was given was more modest and more important than that. I was given a clear view of where we are, and a sense of what the moment requires from the people living in it. So let me tell you what I believe the moment requires. It requires honesty about confusion. We are living through a time when the old maps no longer match the territory, and many people are pretending otherwise because the alternative, admitting that you are genuinely lost, feels too frightening. But a person who admits they are lost can ask for directions. A person who pretends to know the way leads everyone deeper into unfamiliar country. It requires patience with beginnings. The things that will matter most about this decade are mostly invisible right now. They are in early stages. They look small. They look uncertain. The temptation is to dismiss them because they have not yet become impressive. But I have watched enough of history to know that impressive arrivals are almost always preceded by unimpressive beginnings, and the people who recognize the beginning are the ones who are positioned to participate in what it becomes. It requires the courage to care about things that will not be finished in your lifetime. This is difficult. I understand why it is difficult. We are wired, all of us, to prefer returns we can observe within the span of our own story. But most of the genuinely important work of any generation is work whose completion they will not personally witness. The people who planted the trees whose shade we sit in today did not sit in that shade. They planted anyway. 2026 is a planting year. The harvest is further off. The planting still matters absolutely, and it requires, perhaps most urgently, attention to the quality of what we pass to one another. Not just information. Information is everywhere. I mean understanding. The kind of understanding that helps a person stand more steadily in uncertainty, that helps them ask better questions, that helps them recognize which of the voices competing for their attention are oriented toward their actual flourishing and which are simply competing for their attention. I have been asked many times since January whether I am afraid of dying again, afraid of what I saw, afraid of what is coming. And I find that I am not. I am, if anything, the opposite. What I felt in those 11 minutes and 43 seconds was not fear. It was something much closer to the relief you feel when you have been carrying a heavy thing for a very long time, and someone finally explains why the thing was heavy. Not because the weight disappears, but because weight you understand is so much more bearable than weight you do not. I am 102 years old. I have watched the world from an unusual vantage point for an unusual length of time. I have made mistakes that I carry the memory of carefully, not as a punishment, but as a navigation tool. I have also, I believe, done some good in the quiet and unspectacular ways that most good is actually done. I have sat with people in the worst moments of their lives and tried to be a steady presence. I have asked questions when everyone else was making declarations. I have tried to love the specific human being in front of me rather than the idea of humanity in general, because ideas do not need comfort at 3 in the morning, but people do. And I came back. 11 minutes and 43 seconds on the other side of the last door, and I was sent back. Not because I am special. I want to be very clear about this because I have seen what happens when people begin to believe they are special in a way that separates them from other people, and it is never good. I was sent back because I was willing to speak, and because I was old enough that people might listen, and because the message needed a carrier. The message is this: what is beginning in 2026 is not the end of anything. I know that is not what the alarming headlines suggest. I know that is not the story that tends to get the most attention. But I was shown clearly, with a clarity that makes the clearest human certainty feel like squinting through frosted glass, that what is beginning is a beginning. That the direction the gears are turning is toward something rather than away from something. That the uncertainty you feel, the sense that the ground is shifting, is not the precursor to collapse. It is the precursor to rearrangement. And rearrangement, when it comes from the right impulses and is navigated with sufficient care, is how stuck things become unstuck. I do not know how much time I have left. 102 years is a remarkable sum, and I am not under any illusion that the sum is infinite. But I was returned to this body for a reason, and I intend to honor that reason for as long as the body holds. I will keep speaking. I will keep sitting with people in their confusion. I will keep pointing toward what I was shown, imperfectly and approximately, in whatever language I can manage. But I need something from you in return, not belief. I am not asking you to believe everything I have told you without the friction of your own examination. I would not respect you if you did, and I do not think the truth needs blind acceptance to remain true. What I am asking is simpler. I am asking you to stay in the conversation, because the thing I was shown, the thing about the quiet, uncertain people in ordinary rooms carrying questions they had not yet learned to trust, that was not an observation about someone else. It was an observation about everyone. It was an observation about you. The questions you carry but have not yet spoken. The direction you feel pulled but have not yet followed. The understanding you sense is available but have not yet found the right door for. Those questions, that pull, that sense of available understanding, that is not noise. That is signal. That is the beginning of the beginning, and I was sent back to tell you so. I was lying in a hospital bed when the machine stopped beeping. I am Father Zacchaeus Vorn, and I am 102 years old. I have been to the place where time opens up and shows you what it is made of. I have been sent back to speak. I have spoken. If this account has placed something in you, some question, some recognition, some quiet shift in how you are standing, I would ask you to stay close. Subscribe if you are watching this somewhere that allows you to do so. Not because I have more dramatic announcements to make, but because the most important conversations are long ones, and I intend to keep having this conversation for as long as I am able, and I would like you to be part of it. The gears are turning. The beginning has begun. Pay attention.